I started drawing maybe 32 years ago. At first, and for a very long time, it was simply fun. I enjoyed making things, copying things, and eventually recording the world around me. I grew up in the 90s, and video games were just starting to blossom. There was no internet in my early years, and so the games themselves and the little booklets that came with them were often the greatest source of inspiration we could find. Over time, this escalated to working from encyclopedias, eyewitness books on different manners of animals, and eventually from the strange creatures I found around the Californian Air Force Base upon which I grew up. We found crawfish, snakes, turtles, lizards, and centipedes the size of our hands. My back still crawls thinking about pulling them out from underneath rocks. We climbed salmon dams and made forts beneath oak trees surrounded by blackberry bushes. Through all of this, I drew. The stories we told, our imaginations running wild in the forests, began to work their ways into my art. But it was slow. Progress, in general, was slow. But as a kid, I didn't notice. As a kid, I didn't care. My name is Zach, and welcome to podcast episode 70. Today, we are discussing the slow, sometimes glacial aspects of art itself as a pursuit. As usual, I'm going to explore what I mean by the topic, and then go over how this might actually affect you as an artist. Though I'm going to start adding some closing thoughts and updates at the end of each episode now as well, so stay tuned for those. Feel free to check out the Discord and Patreon link below while you listen. So, art is slow. What does that mean? I suppose my thesis here is really just me being an old man. It might even be a coping mechanism for the fact that it takes so long to become proficient at this thing that we call art. Maybe the fact that it's hard, that we have to endure for months and years to become proficient, leads us to come up with reasons why that might be a good thing. It's like someone at the gym telling you to find pleasure in the screaming pain of your muscles because it's good for you. Now, they're right in that situation, but that doesn't make it more pleasant. Is it actually good for you to feel the maddeningly slow process of art, though? Whether it is or not, if you decide that you want to develop artistic skills, if you have a need to create, and you know at some level you are going to keep doing this for a long time, it is beneficial to find pleasure, or at least solace, in the process. I wish it was quick. Of course I do, and you probably do too. Imagine if you could just download the skills necessary to be an artist, like some strange version of the Matrix. It would be wonderful on the surface. But because that is certainly not the reality we live in, we are left with the understanding that art is slow. That it takes a long time to learn anything. That it takes effort to keep those pieces of gained skill and knowledge and prevent them from slipping away into nothingness. Because we know that, or come to know that, it benefits us to find a way to reframe our perspective on the entire endeavor. That's what brings me to this topic, to the fact that art is hard because it takes a long time. It moves slowly, but that there is some good in that. If you are starting out as an artist, please don't let this discourage you. Any skill takes time to learn, and though 100,000 videos on the internet promise to help you grow quickly, few will ever deliver on that promise. Art is a pursuit and a journey, and though the road is a long one, it is very much worth it. So let's talk a bit about the benefits then. The benefits of art being a slow journey. It's a hike over the mountains, not a marathon, not a race, not a simple walk. So buckle in. As usual, I've broken the subjects into some minor categories. They're a little bit different than normal, or maybe I just needed to have some dissections because it's how I operate, so it's not quite as clean as I would normally put them together. I'm calling this first category human benefits, and this takes us straight into spending time in the real world, studying reality. This pursuit, learning how to make art generally to represent the world around you, requires spending time in that world. Every walk you take, every documentary you watch, heck, even every Netflix show you endure, adds to your repertoire. We are rewarded as artists for taking time to take in the world around us. It is a temptation, obviously, to spend all of our time indoors, working at our craft, but this is a devilish lure. By exposing ourselves to the world, we allow our artistic brains to take in new things, to augment that which we already have, and to expand that which we can conceive. We tend to look at things with different eyes. In fact, I have one instance that comes to mind every time I think about this, about the fact that artists tend to take in the world differently. My best friend growing up, we met in 6th grade. There's a lot of really awkward and weird stories there, but we continued to go through all of middle school together and high school and a portion of college. And I remember at one point we were driving down the road and we passed a big sign and I missed it. I asked him, "What did it say?" And he kind of looked at me with this slightly bewildered look on his face and said, "I don't know." I looked at it, but I didn't see the words. I saw how it was put together. I saw the lights and the darks and the color. And he kind of shook his head like, "What in the world is happening to me?" That sounds very strange, very esoteric, but there is a lot of truth to that kind of thing. I spend a lot of time when I'm walking around in nature or even just driving to and fro. I notice all kinds of nature things as I drive, and frequently I will point them out to whoever else is in the car with me, and it is very infrequent that I am the second to notice something that way. I attribute this largely to the fact that I spent so much of my youth just wandering around in forests and playing in streams, and I was safely protected in this Air Force base in California. And so I just have a lot of awareness for those things. It's not that I'm necessarily far more observant than most people, but I have eyes and a brain that are tuned in to those things. I'm always looking for them. Now, the other side is I can't remember the names of roads in towns that I've lived in for 20 years because it's just not important to me. I've been able to look up the way to get places since, I started driving, and even now I can drive somewhere once and visually remember how to get there, but there's no way that I could describe it to you without just being like, okay, drive to where the road tees, take a right, you'll take a left where there's this distillery on the right side, you'll drive until you go past these giant red rocks and you'll take the next turn after that. That's how the instructions exist in my mind. And they're really good in that manner because that means I don't have to look for road names or anything. But it also means that interfacing with normal humans and trying to describe those things to them is very difficult. We as artists tend to see the world in a slightly different manner. And maybe you're not visually breaking down a tree when you look at it into, core shadow and cast shadow, highlight, and midtones, but you probably are noticing things that are different. If you've spent a lot of time drawing figures or anatomy, do you not notice how someone moves? Do you not notice the muscle groups when you're at the gym or at the swimming pool on just random people you see? You probably hold off on commenting on them because it will seem strange to the non-creative. But don't you notice those things? I'd love to hear about that. If you've got a thing like that in your life, please let me know in the comments below. It'd be really interesting to see. I have another friend who looks at things in a slightly different way, but he has a tendency to look at anything and be able to break down how it functions. He can walk into a room and just understand how the cabinetry works, how the stove functions, how everything fit in there when the initial builder put it together. He works at remodeling and building things in that fashion, and it's a skill that really suits him. He's really, really good at what he does for that purpose. He has that same kind of brain, though, that breaks things down in different ways. And the more time we spend out amongst the world, the more that just builds up this repertoire in our brain. Our specialized interests augment our artistic abilities. Think about this. When you first began pursuing art, what did you make? What did you draw? Was it anime or machines, animals of some kind, horses perhaps? What was your connection to those things? Very seldom do you as an artist, especially as a beginner artist, start with something that is totally detached from who you are, unless of course you're pursuing it in a nearly academic way. When I was teaching, most of the time I could pick out what some of the things were in a kid's life outside of school by the things that they drew well. If I had people who drew horses well, you could bet money that they spent time around horses. Or people that drew dogs really well, or a particular other animal, or understood how instruments functioned. If a kid played a violin, there was a good chance that they could draw one better. If a kid played the drums, there was a good chance that they could draw it better. Their specialized knowledge came into sharp focus, and they were able to more accurately represent those things. This is one of the benefits of spending time in art is not only will the rest of your time spent on more normal things augment your artistic abilities, but there's more benefits to be pulled from this long journey, spending time just doing normal things. When you're washing the dishes as an artist, you're not just washing a cup or a mug, you're washing a cylinder. And unconsciously, and sometimes consciously, you're looking at how light functions with that thing. And if you're not, I would wager that the next time that you look at one, you will, because once it's in your brain, it's really hard to let go of it. This long, slow journey also helps in the development of patience. This is an age-old and kind of annoying thing to say, yet it's very true. In fact, raising my daughter has brought me right back to my own need to develop patience, and the constant awareness of helping her to develop her own. It is hard for a 5-year-old to sit long enough to bring art to fruition. She frequently gets frustrated with how long it takes paint to dry, or the fact that her drawing doesn't turn out correctly the first time. We've had to have a lot of conversations about this recently, specifically about her pulling a sheet out of her sketchbook or crumpling something up. Obviously, as she's developing emotionally, as her brain is maturing, she's starting to wrap her head around frustration and anger and expectations. And art is a good field for her to work through some of those things. It's hard, though. It's a hard concept for a young kid to wrap their head around, that the failure is okay. But she is developing patience. When she first started drawing at like age 2.5 or 3, she would barely spend more than a couple minutes on a thing. Now, she will often get up in the morning before we do, and she'll spend time drawing things. Sometimes she'll slip them under our door before we're awake and we'll accidentally step on them. She started writing secret notes and putting them on the doors and making jokes by writing "no one's here," spelled very poorly, and putting it on her own door when she's trying to hide or, get the better of us. All of these things, especially her artistic pursuits, are developing patience in her. She's starting to learn that it's worthwhile to spend enough time on something to develop an entire image, to put other things in the composition. Her drawings of herself or other humans or cats, because she loves cats, have elevated in their complexity. Originally, everything was just a series of sticks and shapes. But just this last week, the eyelashes started showing up every time she's drawing a person. And this is a patience that is being developed in her. The understanding that spending 30 seconds more, or 2 minutes more, or 10 minutes more on a drawing is a good thing. It produces a result that she's happier with, a result that's more efficient in portraying whatever it is that she's working on. She's finding joy in that, and patience is being built along the way. Now, this is a trite thing to say. It's one of those things that, we always heard our parents say when we were younger about, you have to endure this difficult thing because it builds character. And yes, there is truth in that. And there is truth that difficult things and hard things and things that take a long time can build your patience. But there's a lot of reality to that when it comes to art. If you're going to stick to art, one of the benefits, one of the huge dramatic benefits, is the fact that it will help you develop patience. But more than that, it's the innate understanding that yielding to patience, having patience and sticking to something is rewarding. The fact that art takes a long time also encourages you to find ways to enjoy it. It is something that, as much as I wish this was not the case, is not always enjoyable. Art can be very difficult. I find that for most of us, it's this middle portion. Starting a project is exciting. Finishing a project is exciting, watching it all come together. But that middle 80% maybe is difficult. It's hard to see it through because you've already kind of got the dopamine hit from starting the thing, and the next one that you're going to get from finishing it is so far off that it's rather difficult. Now, When you stay in the middle, when you're doing this for a long time, you understand that there's not a rush. You're not trying to beat other people or compete with other people. It is this slow, methodical journey. Then it's easier to find ways to enjoy that moment. You can play with your art, which is something that has actually come up several times recently on the channel. I'm not sure why it's a focus in my brain right now, but this happens. This happens to most of us, right? We have a series of things that we focus on for a while. And I've got one big mantra that often comes up, which is that you need to be gracious with yourself when it comes to your art. And it seems for 2025, inadvertently, I'm leaning into you need to let your art be playful. It's a good thing. It's a good thing to let your art be play. Not because it means that you're taking it less seriously, which for some people would be a detriment or a fear. But the reality is when something is playful, when it's freeing, you can stick to it longer. It's easy to come back to it and spend more time working through it. The more fun I have with my art, the more frequently I make art. The more frequently I make art, the more satisfied I am with my art. The more satisfied I am with my art, the less insecure I might feel about it, the more happy to show it to other people I am. And all of that comes together to kick me back into making more art. And for me, who desires to constantly get better, to be able to animate and to depict the things that I want to, constantly getting better while having fun, I couldn't really ask for a whole lot more. That's pretty much what I'm looking for. At its core, art might be the most human thing that there is. We as a race have recorded things through pictorial depiction, perhaps as long as we have been able to form thoughts. And when you slow down, when you embrace the slow journey of art, you are choosing to involve yourself in the most human of things. I don't know if you listening are a spiritual person or not, but I think for most of us in some way, it's nice to have a connection to our ancestors, to the people that came before us, or perhaps even the religious deity that you put your faith in. All of that ties back to this ancient world where things were put down in physical forms on tiles, etched into walls, made into mosaics, maybe even just early paintings and drawings with charcoal or the remnant of things found out in nature. All of these things coalesce. And when we choose to depict things, we are doing something that is ingrained within us. We as humans are built to record things. I don't know that every single one of us is built to be creative. I know that there are probably some of you that bristled the hair on the back of your neck, but I don't know that I think everyone is built to be that way. And this comes from a long time of being an artist, but also a ton of time teaching kids. Most kids have some imagination or creativity to them, but not all. And I don't think that all of them, even that have good imaginations and a predisposition toward creativity, are necessarily built to always be making, depicting, and recording. But for some of us, and it feels like for some of us since the dawn of time, we have had the need to do this, to put things down. And at least for me, and I think probably for some of you as well, there's some beauty in doing this most human of things. It ties us to our roots. It fundamentally pulls you in and ties you to a physical reality. In 2025, when the world feels like it's in a little bit of chaos and the internet is this strange thing and AI looms and what's technology doing, it's good to just make a physical thing. Now, if you're a digital artist, this might hit you the wrong way, but the reality is you are making a thing. That thing can be printed out, it is visible, it can be viewed across the world, but it is a physical thing. It just happens to be that the physical thing is recorded in a whole bunch of zeros and ones, but it is still a physical thing. So don't let yourself be pulled into a weird place there. This next area I'm referring to as artistic benefits, though I'm aware that the last thing I discussed kind of bridged the gap between these two. I wish I could say that was intentional and planned, but even a blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while, right? So to start off the artistic benefits, there's this sense of pride in what you have accomplished when you stick to something for a long time, when you're able to endure that slow, kind of monotonous path. Not everyone is going to take the time to build the skills, but you Putting in the time, grinding, staying up late, working hard while others play, that is an accomplishment. In fact, sticking to something for a long time is an accomplishment. It's very easy to conflate accomplishment with the actual physical, tangible thing that is finished, and that's important too. But there's something about human resilience in just sticking to something for a long time. There's this sense of awe in other people when you talk about how long you've stuck to your career. Pride is a strange thing. We often talk about it in two extremes. Pride is a downfall. It comes before the fall. It is a trait to work on and counter with humility. And yet, pride in your craft is a good thing. So let's focus on that particular form for now. To take pride in something you worked hard on is totally fine, and actually really healthy. It's that excitement you have to show something to someone else. It's the little kid running to their mother saying, "Look what I did, Mom." That pride is a good thing. When you work hard, when you put time into developing skills, you get a sense of satisfaction about what has been accomplished. It's sometimes hard to hear for newer artists, but this is something that has to be built, has to be earned in some way. You likely won't produce much in your early months that you are proud of, though those older than you will often tell you that you should be proud of your progress, and there is truth to that. It takes time to get to a stage where you are happy with your work, usually, but the payoff is often very big in comparison to that amount of time. When you slowly build up your skills to where you can produce things that bring you happiness, satisfaction, a sense of pride, no one can take that from you. You have something to show, which actually leads me into my next point. There's a record of work. There's a record of physical things that you have completed. I don't think this actually gets enough credit in the artistic world. The fact that art produces a physical thing is huge. Obviously, I talked about this a little bit earlier, but this will be a little bit different. Many skills don't do this. Working on a sport, developing an algorithm or program, these are good things, yes, but there is something about a walking stick, a ceramic vessel, a painting, even a sketchbook that is just fundamentally there. It's fundamentally different. It can be handed to someone. It can be held. It can be felt. A physical object means something. We as humans are creatures of body, mind, and soul. To ignore one of these elements is to ignore a portion of what it is to be human. The physical matters, and having actual tangible things is lovely. The fact that I can walk into the storage room here in my basement and I can pull out a sketchbook that spans 20 years ago, actually 25 years ago is the earliest one that I still have on record, is a wonderful and kind of crazy thing. The fact that I can go pull out a sketchbook that I worked on when I was 11 and 12 years old, and I can see not just like the quality of the artwork, the quality of my lines and shading, but I can see where my brain was. I can interpret pieces of what I was thinking about in the world around me. I might find portraits of friends. I certainly find drawings from all the video games and movies that I enjoyed. I can see the beginnings of the stories that I work on today as I move up into 8th and 9th grade. That kind of thing is wonderful. I have started to write my fantasy novels here in the last couple years, and to go back and see the blossoming languages and the initial sketches that are very heavily anime influenced in those earlier years, and to watch that develop over time. It's so intriguing to go back and pull out pieces of my high school self and find those elements still showing up in my work today. It's really intriguing to go along that path. I've also kept my daughter's sketchbooks from day one. She has about 5 or 6 now that she's finished, and each of them are dated and they're on the shelf right above mine. I hope to be able to keep track of them forever, and here soon I will probably start digitizing them. We have had some threats in the last year. Last year actually was a really bad one, of wildfires. We were evacuated. Of all the things that I have to contemplate losing in the fires, the artwork is the biggest one for me. So much of everything else can be reaccumulated. Even my instruments and my book collections and my old toys and models and things like that, things that have immense nostalgic personal value to me, most of them can be replaced. But I can't replace my sketchbooks. I can't replace my daughter's work. And so I think going to start recording all of that and putting that somewhere. I'm not sure exactly how I'll do it because she's 5.5, so I'm not gonna put her work online and have it public. But there's a good chance I might start like a YouTube channel for her and just private everything and just have it there as a resource. Probably will once a year take all of the artwork that I've digitized as well, put it on a hard drive and like store it at my parents' house or something, just so there's some backups. Maybe this is a little over the top, but it seems like it won't feel like it's over the top if the terrible ever happens, if the worst ever happens, and I'm in that situation. But the physicality of those things is wonderful because a lot of those memories exist in our minds. You might be able to go back in your head and find some of the work and the things that you did when you were 12 or when you were 18 or maybe when you were 30. And there is a validity to those memories, but the physical reality is often different. When you go back and look at old work, old paintings, old drawings, it can transport you back to a previous time. Sometimes that's good and sometimes it's unhealthy. If you had a troubled upbringing, it can be, traumatizing to go back and look at some of those old works. And yet, in a weird way, having them and having access to them for most people is going to be productive. I mean, if you are in a situation where your counselor or therapist says those things are chaining you to your past and you need to burn them all, then by all means. I am generally of the opinion that you should never destroy your own artwork, but I could imagine some situations where that would actually be beneficial for you. There is another aspect to this that is a little bit more sad. I was going to say macabre, but I don't really think of it in that way myself. And this is the fact that we are all going to perish at some point. And the physical things that we have produced. And again, this extends to digital stuff because that footprint is real. Those things are actual physical things. They just exist in this kind of weird intermittent space that the world doesn't seem to understand. But that aside, when we are gone, the things that we have made persist. In some sense, we see this with famous artists. We can still go find Van Gogh's work. We can still find Monet's work. All of the musical artists who have passed on and we can still listen to their stuff, it's such a wonderful thing. But for those around you who love you, who are important to you and you them, your artwork is a reminder of you and who you were. I take some solace in the fact that if something terrible happens to me, my wife and my daughter have access to hundreds and hundreds of hours of me talking about my thoughts on things. They can thumb through all my sketchbooks. They can look at all the work that I put together. They can read the novels that I've finished and the ones that I'm working on. Now, that's not going to be much comfort in that particular situation, but it will be more comfort than nothing. And this could be called a legacy. In fact, that's often how it's referred to when you talk about leaving things to the next generation. I hope that it's me at 70 or 80 years old and I'm able to leave this stuff to my daughter and to anyone else that I've had an impact on them in their artistic pursuits, but you can't plan for those things. And so there is a dramatic benefit for the people around you whom you love and for future people who might be inspired by your work to actually have things. And this only happens if you really engage in art over the long haul. If you are embracing this slow, methodical journey, this hobbit-like pursuit of a simple life through artistic endeavor, then you'll have a lot of things like this to leave behind for those who persist, for those who follow after. I hope this isn't too dark to talk about. I know that it's an uncomfortable topic for some people, but I've tried to be flowery in my language and not get too harsh with things. I grew up on an Air Force base, so I dealt with things like this at a very early age. It has been a part of my life for a long time, and so this has probably been part of my way of dealing with those things. I am very happy that, when my father passes, I have pieces of his artwork, and those things will keep me comfort. His father, who passed in 2003, I believe, I have several artifacts in my studio right now that belong to him. In fact, sitting just 3 feet from me is this tiny little wooden box the hinges of which are long since gone. But it's this tiny little wooden box that my grandpa gave me maybe 25 years ago, 30 years ago. No, not quite. Yeah, probably 25 years ago. I still have those things. They have emotional value for me. They have nostalgic value for me. And that is your art. Your art persists after you do. And it can be this beautiful, wonderful thing to remind those around you who love you that you are still there in some small capacity. Well, moving on from that into a more present day version is that art itself, the sticking to this thing for such a long time, provides things to give to people before you go away. So I often see this in the form of gifts. If you are a painter or you are a drawer, it can be very fun, even in the most menial way, to draw cards for people for their birthday, for holidays. I have a cousin who used to do this all the time for each of the holidays. She would hand make these cards, and they were wonderful, and it was exciting every single time we received one, because you always knew that she was going to just produce this intricate personal thing for you. I have many pieces of artwork hanging around my house and hanging in my studio that are from students, that are from friends, some are from growing up. I really enjoy having those things. Every time I see them, I think of those people. And I've obviously given away pieces. I've done paintings for my brother or my sister-in-law or for my parents, and they hang up around their homes, presumably. Maybe they just put them up when I come over. But the idea of sharing a piece of your slow, methodical journey with other people can be a wonderful thing. It also helps clear out the closets, because if you're anything like me, you accidentally accumulate too much through the years, so it can be a really cool thing. As a last thing on this note, consider trading artwork with other artists. This is something that I think is really, really cool, and I wish I would have done more of it with my seniors at the high school that I was working at. It's a cool thing to make a piece of art and then to trade it with another artist. Often we think our art is worse than everyone else does, so you usually feel like you're getting a good deal. I'm trading you this painting that I think sucks for this drawing that you made that I think is awesome. So consider with the other artists in your world, if you have accumulated too many pieces, consider trading some of them with other people. The last thing here on the artistic side of things is just the physicality of working with your hands. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here because I have chatted about this a little bit already, but there is something kind of special just about the fact that you are connecting with the body. We've talked a lot about kind of the psychology so far, the mental aspects and leaving things to other people, but there's just a lot to be said for physically working with your hands. As I mentioned several minutes ago, we as artists are this kind of weird amalgamation of, mind, body, and soul. You can look at soul however you want to, but for me, those three aspects seem to be this homogeneous strangeness that makes up the creative person. And when you engage with the physicality of making things, not just brainstorming, not just writing, not just thinking, but actually making something, you're allowing the parts of yourself, potentially disparate parts of yourself, to be knit together. And there's a wholeness in that. This sounds almost like weird hippie stuff, but the hippies did have some points. I find most philosophies and psychologies at some point have a point. And this is a holistic way of looking at the artistic being, is the fact that we are made up of several disparate components and that life is better when we engage with more of them. I find this especially when I'm working on lots of heady mental stuff, is if I just go chop some wood, it feels like I'm evening out these things in my brain. Each of these categories needs to have so much effort put into them, and if I don't do that well, if I don't put the right amount of effort across all three of those buckets, then I'm not in a good spot. So working on art is just something that allows you to constantly engage in more aspects of your whole human self, and it can't help but be beneficial for you. This last segment I'm calling psychological benefits, but I'm not going to spend a crazy amount of time here because we're already 30 some odd minutes in, and I think I've touched upon a lot of these pieces just in my rambles throughout the rest of it. But the first of this is that your art is a good microcosm of the rest of your life. And this is the fact that when you are spending this time, you're engaging with the slow process, with this fact that it's just going to take you a long time. This is just a small version of what the rest of your life is going to be like. And it's really healthy for us to engage in. If you embrace the fact that it's this slow pursuit that is going to require a lot of you over a long period of time, it helps with understanding that that's how human relationships work. That you can't build a friendship by doing all of the research and hammering everything out by working 80 hours a week for a couple months. You will forge friendships sometimes in fire like that, but true long-term friendships and relationships are going to be built by a ton of tiny little motions and tiny little thoughts over time. In fact, if you do forge your friendships in fire because maybe you work in a career or you've been through a crisis that has some intensity to it, those relationships will often fall apart slowly, but they will fall apart if they're not maintained afterward, just like your artistic skills will be. So, working on the artistic journey, understanding that slow pursuit and how that affects things can just be a small microcosm of the rest of your life and how everything else works. I think of this with students and with my daughter as a practice for the real world, not in a derogatory sense, but because it's a microcosm of the rest of your life, it gives you the ability to start building skills in a less stressful and less permanent situation. If you mess up with your artistic skills, that's not going to create any permanent damage. Whereas if you mess up a friendship, sometimes that's it. You know, if the other person is particularly forgiving, there might be a chance to move forward with things later. But often, or maybe not often, but sometimes that's just it. And as terrible as that is, that's just reality. You can't manipulate another human to give you another chance. And so you have to be careful. Art, the fact that you have to stick to it for a long time, that you have to understand the slowness, can be a really good practice for many other areas of your life, for your career and for your human relationships. And I really do feel like your human relationships are about the most valuable thing there is in your life. So if you can practice with something on a smaller scale, it's going to be really beneficial for you. You can learn to understand your own thought processes as well. Learn more about yourself. Art, because it's this weird hybrid of physical and emotional and mental, gives you the opportunity to understand more about yourself. I find it interesting that I can world build on almost any day, regardless of my mental state. I can sit down and work on histories. I can sit down and sketch out robots and things like that. But the second that I want to work on dialogue in my novel, the second I want to work on an illustration that involves a character that I have any emotional connection to, there's a level of stress and anxiety that immediately comes into that. Now, why is that? I know for me, it's that I have expectations, that I've got an idea of how this thing should turn out. I want to make sure I do this thing justice. It can be the same emotional thing that you get when you're working on a piece for yourself versus a commission or something for someone else. There's a layer of stress that comes up because there's expectations from other people. Understanding those aspects and hundreds others that are going to kind of spill out of the artistic realm gives you an understanding of how you work, how you think, the way that you interpret and interact with the world. This slow meandering path is one of the best ways to understand how you as an artist, as a creative, as a human being work. The more you understand about yourself, your expectations, the places that you find disappointment, what you find joy in, what really, grinds your gears, the more you understand about those things, the more you're able to communicate that to your partners, your friends, your family, and the more you're able to avoid those pitfalls for yourself. And in my experience, only something like art that requires you to work slowly through these things is going to give you the ability to work that stuff out before you're in a situation where there's dire consequences. Often people handle these things and learn these things in relationships, and sometimes those explode in tremendous ways. And though it is just a microcosm, like I mentioned earlier, art can give you a way to understand those aspects of yourself and who you are and what you want, hopefully avoiding some of the trauma and some of the terrible things that can come out. It is a lovely way to grow to understand and love yourself more. In that same train of thought, it can often give you emotional resilience and some buffering against things. Sometimes this is just the result of having to endure. Resilience in a lot of ways, and this ties into the last point, which I'm just going to wrap in here too, which is perseverance. Resilience and perseverance are pretty much always developed by having to endure something. It would be wonderful if you could build resilience or perseverance by, some other tactic, but it seems to me that it's only built by situations that require it. While this is logical in some degree, it's also really unfortunate. I really wish that I could help my daughter find a way to learn patience and perseverance and resilience that didn't basically put her in situations where resilience was the thing you had to do or you quit. But that seems to be how it works. And so sticking to art for the long haul is a good way to build resilience, to build perseverance. If you understand that, in some capacities, this piece of artwork is going to take 40 hours, you're working against the natural human desire to have everything you want immediately. You are working on delayed gratification. You're working on understanding and developing that skill set. The other side of that is not for a singular piece, but for the journey itself, is understanding you are not going to be able to learn anatomy in a week. I know there's tons of videos online that tell you, learn anatomy in a week or learn how to sketch in 2 hours. Maybe somebody has cracked a code somewhere, but by and large, all of those things are just clickbait. The reality is you need to be resilient. You need to persevere in order to build up the artistic skills that you want. It is a long, slow journey. And there are a lot of people that just doesn't jive with them. That's not what they want. They want a cheat code to get through things. And there are simple shortcuts that will help you. But often, the shortcuts will help you attain a certain very specific thing, and they won't actually help you in any other area. Now, if you learned a ton of shortcuts, maybe you would be okay, but your skill set would be very finite, very limited. This slow, methodical journey is one of the perfect ways to build up resilience, to build up perseverance. Because if you stick to something, if you learn to endure the crappy stages of a drawing, the ugly stages of a painting, and keep moving forward, those skills all transfer to the rest of your life. I am a more patient person now because I understand how long it takes to develop a skill. Does that mean I like it? Does that mean I'm always excited and like, yay, I'm going to go make some crappy drawings today so I can get to the good ones in 6 months? No, I hate it. But I hate it less than I used to. And I understand the process more. And the less in the way of expectations that I put on myself, the more grace I give myself, the more often I come back to the work, the more often I enjoy the work. The percentage of art that I do now that I enjoy is higher than it ever has been. And that's because I have learned to stick to things. I've built some resilience over the years, though I still want and desire tremendously more resilience. Well, what are my closing thoughts on this whole topic? This topic of art is slow and that is good. Do I actually believe it? The more I think about it throughout this process of writing the script and recording this, I do wonder if there is some level of, because this is the situation we have to endure, I'm just coping and I'm trying to come up with a way of making something that kind of sucks just be a little bit less sucky. And I have to allow for that option. But truthfully, I do believe what I've talked about here. In fact, when I find that I'm rambling and just kind of saying things, I will almost always go back and just delete it unless I, randomly get to a nugget of wisdom, which does occasionally happen. But I do think there is an element of coping, but I think that it's actually beneficial. It's a matter of reframing and perspective as far as anything goes. This idea that if you want to be an artist or you have to be an artist and this is what the journey is going to look like, it's going to take a long time, doesn't it behoove you to try to look at it in as positive a light as possible? And I think that's really what this is. I had some counseling a couple years back, and one of the most beneficial things, perhaps actually the most beneficial thing that I walked away from in that was how much power I have to change how I look at a thing. I obviously can't change a thing. I can't change how the world around me is functioning, but I can change how I look at it. I also learned that if you leave an interaction of any kind, that your brain tends to categorize it in your mind as positive or negative based on the last thing that happened. And this was a huge shift for me at work. When we would have these sessions of complaining, as teachers do, I would try to get in the last comment before I left the room and just shift that situation into some positive light. I noticed for me, immediately, I left those conversations feeling less down, but also the next time I ran into people, they too had kind of unconsciously saved that memory as like, oh, that was a fairly positive interaction. This is something that we can do with our artwork as well. We can look at the pursuit, we can look at the journey, and if we can find a way to just move the meter on that a little bit more towards the positivity, it's going to cache it in our minds as a more positive thing. The same thing goes for each of your pieces as well. If you finish a drawing and you are immediately disappointed with it, and then you close your sketchbook, the memory that you have last associated with the sketchbook with your drawing is negative. If you can find a way to appreciate some piece of it, find something in it that is exciting for you, then you can again cache that in your mind, store it somewhere as a positive memory. That perhaps is just a mechanism to deal with all this, a coping mechanism, if you will, but there's nothing wrong with that. If you feel drawn to or you have to create things, you might as well enjoy it more along the way. And so embracing the slowness of art, understanding that there are good aspects to it. Are there only good aspects? No, of course not. But there are good aspects to it. And if you embrace those, if you focus on those, this whole journey, this whole pursuit becomes a more positive thing. Well, as always, thanks for being here. I really appreciate you listening. This has been a long podcast, but it's been kind of an interesting one for me to pull apart. It is very cold right now. It was -8 degrees when I woke up this morning. That's in Fahrenheit. For my Celsius folk, I don't know the conversion right off the top of my head, but I paused recording for a moment and it's -22.2 is what it looks like. So very cold this morning. In fact, my toes are getting cold because I have to turn off the heater in this room in order to record my session. So as soon as I'm done here, I will turn the heater back on so my paints don't get all screwed up and all that jazz. But it's been an early cold year. Generally, it doesn't get cold like this until, February. And I'm recording this podcast on the 19th and the 20th of January. But yeah, thank you for listening. Thank you to my patrons who are on the screen right now. If you want to check out my Patreon, it is linked below. It gives you access to some exclusive videos and updates, the ability to vote on upcoming content, and it gives you the ability to support me as well. The Discord server is linked as well in the description, and it's absolutely free. It's just a sweet little community where we can help each other out on our artwork and give feedback and see what other people are doing. So I'd encourage you to check that out. Well, have a good one, y'all. See you soon.